It is Stephanie with the ranchershomestead.com blog, and welcome back to the channel. So today I'm going to take you along for my morning. We are going to make cinnamon rolls that are gluten-free using, for the glaze, a homemade powdered sugar. So I'm going to show you how to make homemade powdered sugar. So easy, you're going to be shocked that it's that easy. And then while the cinnamon rolls are baking, I have my arts and crafts closet or cabinet to organize, and so I'm going to bring you along, show you my steps in how I do that. So let's get our cinnamon roll dough mixed up so we can get it in the fridge to chill, and then we can get that process going. So what you're going to do is you first want to get your yeast proofed. So I have a 1/4 cup of warm milk here, and I have a 1/2 tablespoon of sugar. I'm just going to stick that right on in, and then I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of active dry yeast. If you have an instant yeast, you can go ahead and skip this step and just throw it into your flour mixture when you're doing your dry ingredients, but I don't use instant yeast. So I am using my active dry yeast. So I'm going to go ahead and whisk that up, and then just set it aside to be able to proof. It'll get nice and warm and foamy and start bubbling, and you'll know it's ready. In here I have 1.5 cups of flour, and I have 2 tablespoons of sugar. I'm going to add that in. I'm going to go ahead and add 1/2 teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder. Now I'm just going to give this all a stir, just so that it gets nice and mixed in. Now I'm going to take 1/2 cup or 1 stick of very cold butter, and I'm going to cut it up into like 1/2 inch, 1 inch cubes to add to my flour. You don't need to be real technical about how you chop it up, it just makes it easier to cut into the flour. I'm going to take the whole thing and add it to my flour mix. And then I'm going to use a pastry cutter and just cut my butter right on in. You can use 2 butter knives if you don't have a pastry cutter. I do find that the pastry cutter does make it easy, and they're really inexpensive. For years, just a little story, for years I used my 2 butter knives, and it did fine. I mean, it does work. And then I think these are like $7 or $8. They're super cheap. One day I was like, I'm gonna get a pastry cutter. All of the recipes I use, they always call for one. And I got one, and it just does the job so much easier. I'm like, why didn't I spend the $8 and just get one so many years prior? You know, you live and you learn. Just trying to save pennies. What you're looking for here is for your flour mixture to have like little pea-size pieces of butter throughout. So once you get to that point, you can go ahead and stop. Okay, so my yeast mixture and milk is nice and foamy. I'm going to go ahead and take 1 egg, and I'm going to add it to my milk mixture, and then take my whisk and just whisk it up. Now here's the part where you just have to kind of learn to read your dough. And I'm going to go ahead and pour this into my flour and mix it with my spoon. What you're looking for in your consistency of your dough is something to be able to roll out. So you don't want your dough sticky, but you don't want it crumbly. And so this is the part where I will just work it with my hands, work it with the spoon, and then as needed, I will either add flour or add milk to get it to the right consistency. I'm thinking already that I'm going to need a little bit more flour, because it's pretty sticky, and I don't want that. You can see that. Alright, I went ahead and added about 1/4 cup more of gluten-free all-purpose flour, and that seems to have done the trick. It depends on the flour that you're using and kind of the temperature of your house, how big the size of your egg was that you added. That will determine if you need to add more flour or not. And it's just different every single time. So you're just going to have to play with it, learn to read it, and you just want it to be nice and easy to work with. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and take this dough here and I'm gonna go stick it in my bowl. Now you can wrap it in plastic wrap or just leave it in your bowl, and I'm gonna pop it in my fridge for 30 minutes or longer. A minimum of 30 minutes. That is going to help the rollout process. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get my filling mixture whipped up while we're waiting for our dough to chill. So I have about 4 tablespoons of butter here. I just melted on the stove, and to make my life easier and to not in the nature of saving dishes, I'm just gonna do it right here in this pot. So I'm gonna let it come off the heat for a few minutes and let it cool down, just so that your sugar doesn't melt completely. You don't want your sugar that you're adding to it, your brown sugar, to melt into a liquid. You want it to stay kind of crystallized. So I'm just going to give this a second. And I have 1 cup of brown sugar here. I have some salt and some cinnamon that I'm going to add to my filling mixture that will go inside your cinnamon rolls, laid on your dough before you roll them up. Okay, so this has cooled enough, and it's just melted butter. And I'm going to go ahead and add in my 1 cup of brown sugar. I'm going to add in 2 tablespoons of cinnamon. And about 1/8 teaspoon of salt. To be honest, I don't measure that. I just kind of sprinkle it in out of my salt shaker. And then you're just going to mix it all up. Get any clumps out of your brown sugar. And get it all nice and mixed. You want it fairly thick because you're going to spread it onto your mixture. Or onto your dough, I'm sorry. Alright, so this is nice and mixed. I have a pretty thick consistency here, as you can see. And I'm just going to set this aside while my dough finishes chilling, and then we'll go ahead and roll it out and add this to it. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes with my dough. I have a piece of parchment paper down here, and I just sprinkled some gluten-free flour on it. I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle a little bit more flour on the top. This just makes it easy not to stick. You don't need to do it on parchment paper. You can just do it on a well-floured surface if you'd like. But I'm all about ease, and this is an easy cleanup. Okay, so now you're going to go ahead and roll out your dough. And I just roll it into a rectangle. I kind of churn it and roll it out the best that I can. You don't want your dough to be too thin, because if it's too thin, then you're not going to get those nice, big, juicy, plump cinnamon rolls. So I try and do it about a 1/2 inch thick. But if you go, I wouldn't go any thinner than 1/4 of an inch. Okay, now I'm going to peel off my top layer, and as you can see, I already didn't flour enough, so it's starting to stick to the parchment paper, so I'll just take a little bit of flour and sprinkle it to help ease it so it doesn't stick to it. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and take my filling that I'd already done, and I am going to spread it all over on the inside. I just kind of dump it out and then spread it around with my spoon. Now you want to leave a generous little space along the edges. It doesn't need to be, I usually do about a 1/2 inch. It doesn't need to be like exact. I just want to make sure that it makes it easier to roll up. Now here comes the fun part. I kind of lift my paper to get it started and fold it over. You're going to try and roll this up. Now when I'm rolling, if I well floured it, it should roll pretty easy. And I just kind of go back and forth. If I'm having a problem, the dough scraper really helps to lift it off of your parchment paper and to keep it going. And you want to kind of keep pinching it so that it stays nice and tight and isn't ripping. keep rolling it as I go, pinching as I need to. Sometimes I lift up parchment paper, and that's why doing it on parchment paper does kind of help. If you didn't flour your parchment paper enough, it does become more of a problem. All right. Okay, so I have my roll here, and now I'm going to get a cast iron pan, or you can use a cake pan, or you can use a baking dish, whatever you want to bake your cinnamon rolls in, but I want them to be well buttered or well oiled so that they don't stick. Okay, now I'm going to get my cinnamon rolls into my well buttered pan. I usually cut off the ends because they're not very nicely shaped, and I do about 1 inch thick. Now when I turn it on its side, I try to pinch it a little bit just so your dough stays together. And I'm going to place them in my pan about 2 inches apart. As you get to the center, you will have bigger cinnamon rolls. The ends are usually nice and thin. Okay, so the ends I'll just throw away. These ones will bake. Now I'm going to stick these in my oven with the light on, and I'm going to let them rise for like 30 minutes to an hour. You just want them to kind of fill out and let the yeast really do its work in the dough and make it nice and fluffy. Okay, so while my cinnamon rolls are rising, I am going to show you how easy it is to make powdered sugar, because we are going to make a glaze for our cinnamon rolls. Okay, I've not bought powdered sugar since I found this out, but literally powdered sugar is sugar blended up to a powder. So what you want to do is get 2 cups of sugar, your white cane sugar, into your blender, a well-powered blender. So I like to use my Vitamix. Very powerful. It's my favorite blender. I do so much. I make peanut butter, I make everything out of it. It's really, really handy. And then if you plan on like storing this in a jar for later use to always have a little bit of powdered sugar on hand, you're going to want to add in 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. This is just your anti-caking agent, and so it just helps it to not clump back up once it becomes a powder. I have stored it without it and not had a problem, so it's totally up to you, but I do it just because I don't know how long it'll sit in that jar. We don't use powdered sugar often, just sometimes on French toast or if we're baking, so I always like to have the anti-caking agent in it just in case. Okay, so now all you're going to do is blend it up. Give it a minute to let the powder settle. Now look at it, make sure it's nice and powdery, and now you have powdered sugar. I'm only going to use a cup of this for the glaze for the cinnamon roll, so the rest of it I'll just go ahead and stick in a jar with a lid and a ring, and we're ready to use it anytime. But powdered sugar is so easy, you don't need to buy it from the store anymore. Okay, they have rose a little bit in the oven, and now I'm going to set my oven to 350, and we're going to bake them for about 25 minutes. While they are baking, I'm going to go ahead and get my glaze mixed up with the powdered sugar that I just showed you how to make. Okay, so while my cinnamon rolls are baking, let's get this mixed up. I have 1 cup, and I just use a measuring cup because it has the spout so it's easy to pour. 1 cup of that homemade powdered sugar. If you have store-bought powdered sugar, that's totally fine. I did look in my cabinet and realize that I'm completely out of vanilla, so I won't have vanilla in this glaze, but typically I would do a 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla, and then I'm going to start with 2 tablespoons of milk. Then I'm going to go ahead and just whisk it up using a whisk, and I am going to add milk by the tablespoon as needed. So this needs just a little bit more milk. Just like the flour and liquid mixture, in the dough, it's really hard to correct if you go too fast. So I always start small and add as needed. For the glaze, I want it to pour, but I don't want it to be like super runny because you want it to stick to your cinnamon rolls. So this is actually almost, I'm going to do just a little dabble because I don't want to do too much. This is almost the right consistency. Now, if you want it thicker and you want to put it on like with a knife, you can definitely do that too. I like to just drizzle it on. I need just a little bit more. Now, when my cinnamon rolls come out, I will be ready to glaze them and then serve them nice and warm to the family. So while my cinnamon rolls are in the oven and baking, I'm gonna get this art cabinet cleaned up here. So when I start organizing a closet or a cabinet, my number one first step is to know how much time you have. So there's nothing more frustrating than starting a project that you can't complete, especially in an organizational project. So when I'm looking at organizing a cabinet or organizing a closet, this probably will take me 30 minutes, maybe, less than an hour. So I know I have the time to do that from start to finish. You want to make sure that whatever you're doing, you have enough time in your day during that time to do it start to finish. So that's my first step. Second step is I'm going to take everything out of this cabinet. And that's why you need to make sure that you have enough time to do start to finish, because that can get really, really frustrating when you are trying to complete a project and you run out of time and now you have stuff everywhere and then you don't have the time to get it put back together. It gets really overwhelming. So I'm going to go ahead and take everything out of this cabinet and then wipe it out. Okay, once you have everything taken out of your cabinet and you've wiped it clean, I like to just go around and collect different baskets and jars and things and containers like that. In a cabinet like this, I don't feel like anything needs to be matchy or you need to go out and spend any money. I just use what I have. So I went around and collected a few, I don't even know where I got this, that I have just had in closets. And then of course I use a lot of mason jars. And then what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and take all of the things there on the table and start piecing it all together and seeing how everything fits and how it's going to fit back in the cabinet. And then I'll take my trusty little label maker and label things to make it very nice and clean and crisp. So I'm going to go ahead and start piecing all of that stuff back together, getting them into containers, and so that they're nice and organized, and then labeling all of my containers that need to be labeled with what's inside of them. Now that I have everything in their jars or in their containers, baskets, and labeled, now I'm just going to kind of piece it back together. I don't really have any rhyme or reason to how I piece it back together. It's basically how the containers fit, especially since I don't do like go buy containers. So I will just, see that one, my thought was to put this underneath it, but it won't fit with what I have in that jar. So I'll go ahead and just kind of put what I can, the bigger things in the back and the smaller things up front. But like I said, no rhyme or reason. I just kind of start sticking jars in and how they fit. So that is it. This took me about 30 minutes. It was perfect time while my cinnamon rolls baked. I pulled them out and let them cool right before, just a few minutes ago. And this cabinet is now reorganized, labels, feels good. I try and do this about once a week to something in my house, and that just helps me to declutter, throw away things that don't need to be around, and just stay organized. We live in a tiny house, and I have maximized our space to the most that I can, and so if I don't stay on top of these things, clutter happens very, very quickly. So this is how I organize. That's kind of the steps that I follow. It costs you nothing to get closets, cabinets, things like that organized. Like I said, I try and find what I have at home, but I do look for when I'm at Walmart, at Target, and I see things on sale or in the dollar section, little containers and stuff, I will pick those up and just kind of tuck them away in a closet for projects like this. But I try, unless it's going to be something that's out on my shelves that everybody can see, I typically don't make everything look uniform. I don't buy containers and spend a lot of money to keep cabinets organized. I use a lot of mason jars or repurposed jars. So I buy my honey in bulk in 1 gallon and half gallon from a local store, and it comes in these big jars. So I just take the labels off, clean it up, and I have so many of those jars, and so I use those. So I just try and repurpose as much as I can. If I get something, a gift in a gift basket, I just tuck that basket away until I need to use it. Sometimes I re-gift something in it, sometimes I use it to organize something. But that's just kind of a budget-friendly way to get your house organized, get your cabinets, closets, things like that organized. So go get yourself some cinnamon rolls, gluten-free of course. Go ahead and get yourself a cabinet or a closet cleaned using these steps, budget-friendly without having to buy a bunch of stuff. As always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and I hope we'll see you next time. Take care.